Hi, and welcome to this week's Corporate Jet Investor podcast. We are absolutely delighted to have Jason Zilberbrand from VREF. He's the owner and operator of VREF. He's been in the industry, he's been a broker, he's now a certified aircraft appraiser for more than 30 years. Jason, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Al?
Yeah, great, thanks. It's good to sit down with you and go through this. Okay, I'm going to start with the hardest question. You're looking at thousands of data points. What's happening in the business jet market at the moment?
Yes. This is a hot topic for sure. So, yeah, it is it's a dynamic market for sure. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of things that I think normally are very correlated, which seem to be at this point at least not so correlated, meaning that a lot of markets tend to move in the same direction, and a lot of economic issues that we see, which are very cyclical, also tend to be, moving in the same direction. And I think really what's happened is that we were kind of set up for this just because of the transition with the new administration coming into the United States. And then at the same time, we were really dealing with just a whole bunch of just stuff from COVID, and I think our industry is so unique in that a lot of manufacturers are impacted by vendors and their ability to spool up manufacturing. And so really with COVID, that was kind of the beginning of a whole new set of rules that we all had to play with. And so if we rewind the clock a few years, there was a huge run on aircraft. They went through the roof in value. It's pretty obvious why. We had a bunch of pilots looking to maintain their flight hours. We had a bunch of, high net worth individuals who were protecting their ability to travel. And at the same time, we had the unraveling of the commercial sector, which is still happening. And so I always like to say, as long as, the commercial airlines are business jet's direct competitor, we will be okay in the long run, because they tend to, let's be honest, their customer service is awful. The experience of flying commercially, especially internationally, is awful. And now that we have, since the beginning of the year, this whole question about safety and ATC and stuff going offline, and people, I think the general consumer really is freaking out and has just about had it. But, as we went through, 2021, 2022, 2023, we saw the COVID hangover start to unwind itself, and people were getting back to more normalized travel and kind of forgetting all the lockdown issues. And at the same time, a lot of folks that bought aircraft were first-time aircraft purchasers. They discovered that owning an airplane wasn't for them, whatever the reason was. Maybe it was tied to maintenance bills they weren't expecting. Maybe it was tied to the fact that they just weren't using the aircraft enough to justify keeping it. But we saw inventory slowly starting to creep. And so by the end of 24, there was a lot going on, right? We had numerous conflicts going on, geopolitical situations going on. We had a very, just the election itself just, sent a dividing wall in the United States. It was, one side or the other. The average Joe has absolutely no voice anymore in the political process. And I think the general consumer started to get the jitters. And so normally, which is, very robust end of the year, as you know, a lot of people like to buy aircraft for tax purposes. A lot of people like to buy airplanes for travel at the end of the year for whatever reason. But it was slower than normal. And that slowdown really became apparent in January, February, March. I think March was one of the worst months that I personally have seen in probably over 10 years. And that's just pure data, traffic, closings, phone calls, just overall, work. It was very slow. And I think that has continued. And I think it makes a lot of sense why. We have no easing of interest rates. We have a new administration, like we were, it's pretty obvious, but they came in and now we have to wait and see what all their regulatory changes are going to do. And that's going to impact the small business owner and the large business owner. If you don't know what's going on from a regulatory standpoint within your own business, and you're forced to sit on the sidelines because you don't know what your revenue is going to look like, or you can't project to the end of the year, unfortunately, a lot of purchasing decisions then get parked. And one of those is aircraft. And what I think is really a troubling issue right now, and there's a bunch of them, and they're really starting to compound and compile. And, you got to remember that this time of the year is the beginning of the flying season for the piston market. So this is when we see a tremendous amount of volume, a lot of purchases. A lot of inventory dealers will prep piston aircraft for resale during the winter months because they're not flying. So they'll do refurbishment and then they'll get them ready, end of March, beginning of April. And usually we see just a flurry of activity between really what I like to call a spring fever and Memorial Day. And so once the weather starts to warm up and everybody realizes what's going on, we see a tremendous push, a lot of aircraft getting bought. That hasn't happened this year. And it's actually, it's really been pretty slow. I mean, it's slow to the point where it's extremely noticeable. I will say activity's probably down 15 to 20%. And that's just normal day-to-day activity, and that's stuff that we track, whether it's through our website metrics or volume using our software, but it's pretty obvious. And then to make matters worse, I think, there's a couple things going on specifically in the piston market. And the reason why I'm talking about the piston market is not to bore your audience, but, I do think that there's a trickle down effect. And so what's going on in the piston market, tends to eventually impact everything. And I think parting with, and I would say really the cutoff's about $500,000 and up where you would require financing. That's really the first obstacle we're seeing. Financing's getting harder to find. A lot of banks aren't interested in it anymore. And it's not the big banks that normally finance aircraft. It's the regionalized smaller banks that have a very personalized relationship with a lot of buyers that have pulled out of the market. As you know, there's been no break in interest rates. They're still very high. And so I think, the general consumers, if I own an airplane and I have a low interest rate on my existing payment and nothing really new has come out that's earth shattering, exception of maybe G7 Plus, which we can talk about a little bit, why would I go sell my existing aircraft for a loss because I probably bought it during the COVID premium push? And then to make matters worse, I'm going to replace it with another aircraft and I'm going to have to come up with a larger down payment because the banks aren't going to do 15% down anymore. Now they might want 30 or 35% down, right? You can see how this is just a domino effect. So yeah, I think for most people, especially in the $500,000 to $10 million range, whether it's a business jet, a turboprop, or a high performance piston aircraft, I think you're seeing a lot of people just say, I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait. Had already started selling the G7 units for the year. And so halfway through the year now, you get this feature called Autoland, which you might recognize from like the M600. And I think there's one other aircraft it's available on. But for that market, this is a pretty big deal. This is a game changer. And so I think there's going to be a lot of folks who are going to say, I have a deposit on a G7. I want a plus. I want the ability for the passengers who are on board my aircraft to safely land. God forbid I become incapacitated. And so I think the G6 and the G7 market has really just gotten to the point where it's a massive sell-off. At least that's what it looks like from the numbers. I think the last time I checked, there were 150 of them for sale, which is just crazy. And so this is kind of the situation we're in. Some aircraft continue to do well. And like, for example, pretty consistently, there's very few aircraft available on the open market. And if it does come up for sale, it's usually sold under 100 days. That's probably the bright spot right now. And then there's some issues as well, I think, with inventory that kind of makes sense, right? So a lot of brokers have been talking about this. The fact that, for example, there's a whole bunch of new Gulfstreams that are getting delivered, and they're probably all attached with a existing trade-in aircraft. I don't know how you find homes for 50 plus G550s. I don't think you can. I don't think there's 50 buyers out there. So what's going to happen is that those aircraft are going to continue to drop in price until the first one gets sold. And then, as you know, that's probably, where the good news starts and stops. So I think you're going to start to see this because if you truly have to sell your aircraft, and if it's been on the market for 200 days and you're not getting any traction, it's overpriced. Or there's something going on with the airplane. But I mean, for the most part, I don't think we're dealing with bad aircraft. We might be dealing with an airplane here or there that has damage history or something going on in its pedigree. Maybe it was based in a region that people don't like for whatever reason. That certainly could play a role in making it difficult to sell. And I think right now the markets are really having a hard time accepting that. I think a lot of people are refusing to acknowledge that their airplane isn't worth what they paid for it. And I also think at the same time, because of inflation, because of the new tariffs, because of the bottlenecks that still exist with logistical issues from COVID, the cost of operation just continues to go up. And so for a new airplane owner, once you get past that 6-month honeymoon, and reality sets in and there's bills associated with traveling, and then you have a whole bunch of new friends that you're paying for as well. And it's nice to be popular, but at the same time, I think that there's a lot of people that are realizing this is not a cheap endeavor. Owning your own airplane is incredibly expensive. I don't care how big or how small it is. So what's going on in the markets? Not a lot. I guess that was the long way of answering your question. I mean, it's been very quiet. I bet we see on average during a healthy market, a half dozen desktop appraisals a day, at least requests. And it's probably been from a financing perspective, maybe 1 or 2 a day. So it's slowed down tremendously. And I really don't see how this is going to, this current market environment we're in, the one thing I do know is that summers are very slow in the business jet environment. And so I'm not expecting much to change until we get to October. And I hope that coincides with the Fed's making a decision to lower rates at that point, because I think that the bonus depreciation being back on the table will help a little bit, but it's not going to move the needle. It never really does. It might impact new aircraft, but the pre-owned market is a separate animal, and they're definitely tracking differently, and everything is completely bifurcated. The rules of new and used, behaving similar, completely stopped 4 or 5 years ago.
That's fascinating. You're not being very upbeat.
Well, I mean, look, sometimes you have to have a correction in order to rebuild. I mean, this isn't my personal wish. I mean, I don't want things to be difficult. I don't want people to not buy aircraft. It doesn't make me happy going home and not being busy. I just have to I'm just looking at the cards that were dealt and the data as it comes in. And I've never been one to try and, beat around the bush or gild the lily, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm very forthright with what I see, because I think there's a lot of people that truly depend on not only what we see, but why we're seeing it the way we see it, and so there has to be context to everything. And we have a unique position. I mean, we're by far the largest independent appraisal group. And I don't know any other software company that tracks the number of assets we track or has the number of active subscribers we have. So it's not really me patting ourselves on the back. It's just saying, hey, this is what we're seeing. And I like to tell people about red flags and forewarn them, because when I was a broker, specifically when I was an inventory dealer, there was nobody doing that. And I felt very whipsawed by how the price guides, appraisers, even the banks and their own analysts would treat data, and really the brokers never got a say or a heads up or a fair warning on anything. So I'm very, pro broker and pro dealer. I know what it's like to have skin in the game. I know what it's like to have your own money on the line. I know how difficult of a job that is and how thin the margins are today. So if I can tell the brokerage community and the buying community, hey, there's some things going on, you need to be aware of it. Maybe now's not the time to buy an airplane for resale. Maybe now's not the time to buy anything. That's not me being negative Nancy. That's me saying, I've been in your shoes. Don't go lose money if you don't have to.
No, and I do remember you being very positive. I've seen you put out a very bullish residual value forecast. Must have been, what, 2019, 2018?
Yeah, 2019. And I got a lot of flack for that. If you remember, people are like, he's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But
and actually, with COVID, the market was much better than even you'd gone for.
Oh, it went through the roof. It was beyond my expectations. But I mean, it's not. Sometimes I think we make things overly complicated, and we have to remember that at the end of the day, I mean, we're dealing with airplanes and we're dealing with people that utilize them either for VIP or corporate transport. And, there's a lot of moving pieces in this industry. And so, one person's perspective is just that. It's a perspective. I think you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Certainly, I'm not in Europe. I'm not in South Africa. I'm not in South America. Even if I, were able to give you opinions as to what was going on, in those regions, you'd have to take them with a grain of salt. I'm not there. I'm not living it. I think that that's something that a lot of folks in our industry just need to start doing a better job of. And that's just asking questions. Where is this stuff coming from? Where is this data? Where, and I guess getting back to like being overly optimistic or a realist, I mean, I think the market does what the market does. And if you're telling people in honesty what you think is happening and it aligns with that, I think it gives you a lot of credibility. And I think the flip side is if you're telling everybody that you're beating your drum and everything's great, but it's really not, I think likewise, I think that really ruins your reputation and your credibility. And in the past 5 or 6 years, I have made the decision to raise prices in the middle of a quarter. I have done a lot of things that I think, my predecessors would have never done. And that's purely out of trying to keep the markets from having, some sort of knee-jerk off the cliff reaction. Don't forget, I mean, it's kind of a weird situation. You would think if numbers go up and the values of aircraft go up, everybody would be sending me a bottle of wine and being very nice to me. And that's not necessarily the case. There's always two sides to everything. The values could go up and it could impact somebody's divorce. It could impact somebody's taxes. There's always other things going on in the appraisal and valuation environment outside of pure financing. And I think that that's really important because, I don't just sit and do deals or do appraisal work to support purchases. A lot of what I do is for estates or for legal work or for taxing or taxation. And so that kind of stuff is completely outside of that, that financing world. It's an interesting situation. We have the tax assessors and the IRS agents and all the brokers and all the purchasers, and everybody's using our data. And so if everybody's got the same set of cards, right, transparency is just key at that point because, my job is to not only tell you what it is, but where it came from and why we're doing what we're doing. And I really try and do that through our newsletter. It can be overwhelming, especially because we track so many aircraft and a lot of stuff, like I said, at the beginning of our interview, it's not tracking at the same time anymore. It's not moving at the same pace anymore. And so it just makes a lot of what we do challenging. I'll give you a perfect example. So derivative aircraft are always it's like a big bugaboo, meaning like the Challenger 600 series, right? You've got the straight 600, you've got the 601, then you got the 3A and the ER and the R and the 604 and the 5 and the 550. as you can imagine, it's really hard for us to adjust numbers up or down in the middle of that market, like the 604s, and not adjust the 601s and not adjust the 605s and the 650s. So as much as we're, relying on empirical data, and right now I will tell you that the closings are few and far between. So it's really extended the period of time in which we're looking at closings. Sometimes you have to use a derivative, model that does have closings to adjust the others, because they all are impacted by one another, and they're all definitely bracketed in terms of their value and their prices and where they sit in the marketplace. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is just, it's not easy. So when you take the numbers up, you might have just made it so that somebody can't get a deal done, because now the seller goes, oh, I'm not selling, not for that number. I want an extra $500,000 for it. Right. So there's always two sides to the coin. I find it very, very interesting. When I first started doing this, I always tried to forecast what was going to, cause my phone to ring, and I gave up. It's just the nuttiest stuff now.
Okay, easy. I'm asking you easy questions only.
You can ask me hard ones. That's what I'm here for.
No, I've asked you about the market. How do you value an aircraft?
How do you value an aircraft? So the long answer is you follow a bunch of methodology, and you look at the aircraft, and you look at sales comps, and you look at the equipment that's installed, and you look at the condition of the asset. And then you have to know, so if we're talking about turbine equipment, it's a little bit more complicated, because you have maintenance, and the power plants typically have a much bigger role in the value of the aircraft. There's only so many things that drive the value of an airplane, right? So it's typically the power plant, avionics, refurbishment, condition, and then its maintenance status. So the bigger the airplane, right, the bigger role those power plants are going to play. Fortunately, most aircraft that we look at are on engine programs, at least, stuff that's made. I'd say the cutoff. So I think the cutoff for vintage now is 25 years. So anything prior to 2000 and older, believe it or not, is a vintage aircraft. That makes me feel incredibly old, but that's usually what I see as the cutoff for engine programs. Older airplanes are much more difficult to appraise, because you really have to go back and you have to make sure you know what you're doing in terms of giving appropriate credits to each one of those life limited components, whether or not there's been a midlife or a hot section or an MPI versus, full overhaul or a CZI. So it can get complicated. A really new business jet with low hours that's fresh out of the factory is relatively easy to appraise. So a lot of the, I think, mystery behind what we do is is there a magic wand you're waving? Are you making willy-nilly decisions? Is it art? Is it science? And I would say that a really good appraiser, it's a little bit of both art and science, right? You're using methodology that's tried and true. You're not reinventing the wheel, but you also have to know the market and that asset and the situation and the scope of work and what you're being hired to do. You don't want to, you're a fiduciary as an appraiser. So, if we're talking about appraising an aircraft for financing, then that's going to be to support a loan from a bank, right? So you're going to have a purchase agreement. You're going to know what market that aircraft is in. You're going to really use a sales comp methodology and really hone in on what the value of that aircraft is. And if it's a business jet, it's not very complicated. Older piston aircraft, believe it or not, I charge very little for that work. It's 10 times more complicated. There's 100,000 STCs. You can put different power plants on. There's different TBOs. People do top overhauls. They do partial overhauls. They always want credit for every little thing. But the way I like to tell people, especially because I get a lot of young people that'll call me and say, how do I start doing this? And I tell them, cut your teeth in the piston aircraft, because it's super hard work. And if you're off by a couple $1,000s on a $200,000 airplane, you're getting a phone call, period. I guarantee it. The guy's going to be livid. If you're off by 2% on a business jet, I don't think anybody's going to know. The flip side is there's just a lot less work in the business jet arena. The big banks typically do everything internally. The smaller banks don't do a lot of work. They might do 1 or 2 deals a year. So what you really are looking at is how much of the marketplace is paying cash versus financing. And that's just the pure financing appraisal work. If there's other stuff you're doing, like taxation, for example, or estate planning work. So my job isn't to support financing at that point. It's a different set of issues you're trying to assist your client with. It may be for the transferability of that aircraft after there's been a death. And so you don't want to create a taxable event for your client. At the same time, you could be doing work that is damage related. And that's really, that's my specialty. That's what I spend probably 90% of my time doing is diminution of value and damage assessment work. That work is primarily in the business jet arena because the damage on a smaller aircraft, it typically settles out. They might ask us to appraise the plane, but we typically don't get involved with legal work after that. Whereas with a business jet, it's usually about a year's worth of work. And I will tell you, we're seeing a tremendous amount of just crazy stuff. Like, I don't know what's going on, but a lot of cars hitting aircraft on the ramp, tremendous amount of just damage occurring at FBOs. And I don't think that work ever stops. It's just, you can't really dictate when any of this is going to find you. But I do a lot of that kind of stuff too. So, when you're valuing an aircraft for damage purposes, now you're really creating, it's a tremendous amount of work. I use a set of criteria. I actually did a seminar for the FAA on this topic. So you can go to the FAST website and you can type in damage assessment and you can watch my webinar and get credit for it as well. And I go through everything soup to nuts. It's like a 3-hour webinar. So if you're really interested in how to do DOV and how I do it, absolutely watch it because we wouldn't have time to go through it. But I go in really deep with actual case examples and photos and
it is a fascinating topic. In the airline,
it is
like a panel on in the business jet market. If someone hits your heavy jet with a truck, it makes selling it harder. So it is great. Let's step back a bit.
Sure.
Are you enjoying the appraisal side more than being a broker dealer?
So, God, that's a good question. So I really do love what I do. I think, gosh, this sounds so cliche, but I feel like I was really this was what I was born to do. I've always been a gearhead. I was always into data as a kid. I was the kid that could tell you every model car, its 0 to 60 time, its horsepower, its engine. I mean, that's what made me excited as a kid. And
okay, so let's step back. You started as a kid. How did you end up in your first aviation job?
So I was very fortunate. My dad had a company that had just started when I was a sophomore in high school, and that was called Jet Support Services. Everybody knows it as JSSI. And by the time I had, fast forward 4 years, so I was a sophomore in college, the company was growing pretty quick. So in the very early stages, it was just my dad. And then I would say by 1990, 1991, there were probably 6 people working and they had office space. So by 1992, 93, I think they had about 12 people and they were really looking to grow the business. My dad in those days was very myopically focused on growing the business outside the United States. And so there was not an active sales team for JSSI in the US. I was promoting concerts in college and I was borrowing money from my dad's business partner, a guy by the name of Rick Haskins. Rick was my 8th grade soccer coach and his wife was my 7th grade homeroom teacher. And I knew Rick my entire life. And there was like a conference and my dad walked in and Rick was there with his wife. And I introduced Rick to my dad and the rest is history. They became best friends, immediate business partners. And my dad brought Rick in to help him with Jesse.
Jason, why was your dad not lending you the money?
Because my dad was smart. He knew I would probably piss it away. But no, my dad was actually, it was very interesting. So my grandfather was very entrepreneurial. His entire family was. I have a really interesting family. My dad's side is there's like three billionaires. They've all been self-made. Um, they are a very prominent Milwaukee family. Long story short, when they migrated to the United States, they got into a fight. There were 13 brothers and sisters. Half of them chose the name Zilber. The other half chose the name Rand. So the Rand Corporation, Sam Zilber was my great uncle.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he owned most of Milwaukee, most of the real estate in Milwaukee. He was, he was what's his face? Who was the Jeffrey Dahmer's? He was his landlord. So if you read anything on it, you'll see his name and mentioned in that. He owned.
I'm just guessing that's not good for values.
No, but it's actually really funny because he was just such a dynamic guy. He gave most of his money away when he died. But he owned like the Pabst Brewery. He owned a bunch of really big properties in Milwaukee. And so my grandfather went to Chicago. He was the only brother that did. And he started a soap factory in the early 1900s, turn of the century. And he did that until there were competitors in the soap business. And he decided to clear out his factory. He bulldozed it and he started parking cars. And he turned one parking lot into two into six into 12. And by the time I was in fourth or fifth grade, they had most of downtown Chicago's parking lots under their control or ownership. And wow. So my dad was a parking lot guy. He parked cars for a living. And he made the huge mistake of selling all the property in the early 80s and retiring. And he was way too young to deal with that kind of money. He was way too young to deal with that kind of pressure. I had a younger brother as well. So it was just early 80s, a lot going on. So he blew a big chunk of it and he went back to work. And it was through that process of going back to work that he met Rick. And so he was very much like my grandfather. He wanted me to be self-made. He didn't want me to have it easy. He didn't want to give me anything. When I went to go work for the company, I was shipped out to Detroit. I wasn't even allowed to stay in Chicago because they didn't want me in the same office. They didn't want me sitting and not working. They wanted me to really get out and do it. And so it was a really scary thing for me. I had never done that before. I went to college, obviously, but I'd never started a family and moved my family across the country for a lot of things that I didn't know how it was going to work out. But it wound up being the best thing that ever happened because I really figured that I don't have to be in his shadow and I'm my own man and I can do my own things and I can fail and I can succeed, but I'm going to do it on my own. And that's what he wanted. And so to answer your question, he didn't give me the money because he wanted me to figure out if I wanted it bad enough, then I was going to take the risk. And so that's what happened. And I learned a lot of responsibility comes with taking money from somebody else. It's probably the worst decision anybody can make is taking a bunch of cash from somebody because it just puts you in, especially if you're young, it's just a really, it's hard to explain unless you've been through it, but it's a big responsibility. So I was promoting little punk rock concerts, 40 or 50 people would show up. It turned out a lot of those bands wound up becoming huge, but at the time they were nothing and nobody cared. And I think he saw that I had the initiative. My parents wanted me to get a job as a freshman. I flat out refused. I was really overwhelmed. I grew up in a predominantly Jewish private school. I graduated with 50 kids. I went to school with them from junior kindergarten all the way through senior year of high school. My high school had 250 kids in it total. I was very sheltered. I did not have any real world exposure beyond, Lincoln Park. And I think, my parents really, really wanted me to experience, finding myself and doing it my own way. And if I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail. But, I'm going to, it's really hard to explain. But I mean, I think during those years, I was so excited just to get out of Chicago. And, so I went as far away as they would let me. I went to Colorado, and I went through school and did a lot of snowboarding and a lot of finding myself, and, discovered music that I loved and all sorts of things that became passion. And I think Rick saw that. He saw that I really wanted that. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted my own business. My parents wanted me to get a job. I refused. I wasn't going to go and deliver pizzas. So I figured I'm going to hustle. I'm going to figure this out. And it kind of worked out. I borrowed money from Rick once, and then he got paid back. And I thought, well, let's go bigger this time. So I tried booking a really big group, and Rick backed off immediately. He's like, look, this is beyond, my comfort level. He's like, but just because I'm saying no doesn't mean that it's no. He's like, I want you to look at this as an experience. And so one thing led to another. And I think a couple of weeks later, there was a car waiting outside my apartment in Fort Collins, Colorado. And all my stuff was packed up, and I was driven back to Chicago, and I was in the headquarters the following Monday, and I had long hair and an earring and, typical, this is early 90s. God only knows what I looked like to them. But the first thing was, okay, got to get a haircut, and we'll see you tomorrow. So I went to get my haircut, and I was like in tears, cutting off all my hair. It was like, I don't know, do you ever see the movie Stripes with Bill Murray when they're going into the army? It's a great movie. And there's a scene where they're all going in line to get their hair cut. That's kind of how I felt. It was just like falling in my lap. I'm like, oh, my life's over. But no, it wound up being great. I went to Detroit. Detroit in the mid 90s was the epicenter of business aviation. I know it sounds crazy. Today, people don't believe me, but Oakland County was the busiest airport in the country.
Wow.
So you had everybody there: Chrysler, GM, Ford, Kmart. Gosh, who else was there? You had Volkswagen, you had Federal Mogul. I mean, they were all out of this little tiny airport. And so that's how I cut my teeth. I got really lucky. I'll be honest with you. You can't do what I was able to do then today. The reason being is that the industry has changed so much. I'll give you an example. Back then, you would just literally, knock on a hangar door, and the director of maintenance or the chief pilot or somebody would come and answer it, and you would pitch them. And I was pitching engine maintenance programs, except I didn't know what I was selling. I didn't know anything about the aircraft. I didn't know anything about the pecking order of a flight department. I was so deer in headlights, overwhelmed, in over my head, over my skis, you name it. I was petrified. I didn't have a sales pitch. I didn't have a voice. I didn't know what I was doing. But all of these guys at the airport were amazing. They're like, let me show you around. Let me teach you. This is why you don't call, the director of aviation before you call the director of maintenance. This is why you don't just walk in. And I was like, I couldn't get my arms around it. So it was about, a year or two into it of being there. And I was like, fully I was in the aviation community in Detroit. I was accepted. I was having a blast. I was really getting to know, for me, growing up as a kid, companies like GM and Ford and Daimler Chrysler, they meant something to me. I was really into business. I was really into the stock market. And to me, getting an opportunity to work with those companies was like, it didn't get any better. I mean, I would go home and be like, I can't believe I'm getting, not only am I getting to sell them, but I'm closing them. That was what was really amazing. So I was there through 9/11. That was just an awful time, I think, in aviation, especially the world, but aviation really was impacted. Things started to change again. I came back to Chicago in about 2004. And unfortunately, Rick had gotten very ill. He had meningitis. He was in and out of a coma. I want to say 2007, he passed away. They found he developed like bone cancer as well. And unfortunately, he passed at a very young age. That is what preempted the sale of JSSI. And I was in a very comfortable place in my life at that time because I thought that was that was going to be my company. As I'm sure everybody probably assumed. I mean, I just thought eventually my old man would retire and I would take over the business. I didn't even give it any thought. I mean, that was just basically, set in stone. So here I am, mid 2000s, and not only am I out of work, but I'm out of work for my dad's company. It's kind of a difficult situation. And engine maintenance programs back then, there were 4 of them. And I just was not comfortable going to work for one of my competitors. And my dad had to sign a bunch of paperwork prohibiting him from doing so. So we kind of were in this position of no man's land for a while. And I think it was just over the course of dialogue, where we decided, hey, we don't want to go get a job. We don't want to go work for somebody. We're both entrepreneurs. We've always, the one thing I think we really had in common is we love the art of the deal. We love the brokers, especially back in those days. The personalities were amazing. These guys were just, horse traders through and through. Everybody in the industry was a sweetheart. Everybody worked together. Sure, there were cutthroat deals, but there was enough meat on the bone for everybody to make a living in those days. And so, I mean, back then, literally, Ronnie and I picked up the phone and we called a bunch of brokers that were clients at JSSI and said, what do you think if we go and start selling aircraft? And everybody was like, absolutely. Sounds like a great idea. And that launched the Zilberbrand group, which eventually was converted into the Jet Collection. And basically what we started doing is buying and selling positions. So those days it was unique. There were no restrictions on the resale of a position. The OEMs hadn't caught on yet. I don't even think they knew that it was happening. But I was buying, basically an option to purchase with a deposit in place at a fixed price. And then all I had to do was sell it for more money before it delivered. Piece of cake. I mean, honestly, a piece of cake in those days. There were 3 emerging markets, Brazil, Russia, and India, and they were buying everything that came on the market, whether they wanted it or not. I mean, I remember at one point in time that we had 10% of just the Global Express inventory. I mean, that's how many aircraft we were buying. So it was craziness. And I think like all good things, easy money, easy come, easy go. Obviously, as we all know, 2008 happened and it was easy go. And so again, I had to reinvent the wheel and figure out what I was going to do. And the one thing that I, had been doing all along was a lot of valuation and appraisal work. I was doing it for our finance companies. I was doing it for other brokers' deals to help them support them with a floor plan, because it was a very tight community back in those days. And usually if a bank, had a floor plan with you, they had 6 floor plans with other brokers. So you all hung out together. So that's really when I started getting knee deep in appraising. And I think it just got to the point where I was doing so much of it and I was so, I was really depressed about what had happened in 08. I felt like the market, like entrepreneurs don't like losing control. And I just could not get past the fact that I had no control. Hey, can I put you on hold for 1 second?
Sure.
Okay. I was doing a lot of, just appraisal work for, for financial companies. And, 08 was a bizarre situation. So we all were kind of in the same boat. The numbers were dropping faster than anybody could really calculate. So I was basically spending all of my free time, running numbers, trying to do workouts with the lenders because, I couldn't take delivery of the equipment. We were upside down on everything so much. So that was really, I guess that was the first time where I thought, maybe I could do this full time. It wasn't that I was unhappy being a broker. I was just super depressed about what had happened in 08 and not having any control. And as an entrepreneur, the one thing you don't want is lack of control. And so I'm sitting here and I'm making all the right decisions and I'm doing everything I should do. And then something comes along and I can't do anything about it. And nobody I knew could do anything about it. And that felt like, I don't even know I felt like I was abandoned. I mean, anybody I went to for guidance was like, we're all dealing with this. And I couldn't get my arms around it. It took me years to really stop with the anxiety attacks and, the ability to trust people again. I felt like it was just a horrible situation personally that I had to deal with. So that led, after the market collapse, it really was rebranding the Jet Collection into becoming a brokerage house that sold pre-owned aircraft. And that's when I realized now I'm competing with all of my friends, and the markets were starting to change. The internet was very prevalent at that point. The internet had not existed before that, not for trading, not for tracking, not for marketing. It was definitely, everybody was trying to figure out how to get ahead. And I think the industry back in those days too, certainly from '04 to '08, the industry grew a ton. And I think it went from this small cottage industry to a really, huge juggernaut with a lot of potential. And that's when you started seeing, the big firms and just a lot of things that didn't exist prior to that. And it's really hard to explain to young kids coming in, but the markets were not like they are today. You either knew the 4 or 5 people to call that controlled that model, or you didn't. You did not get a job at a brokerage house. It was impossible. You were either born into it or your best friend was born into it. I mean, literally every broker that you can name and everyone that is active from 30 years ago was born into this industry. Everybody my age was born into this industry. Very few outsiders get in. Today, it's different. Today, there's job postings. You want to go sell an airplane? I think, there's probably a half dozen jobs right now. So it's just different. Is it bad? Is it better? Is it worse? I mean, I'll tell you what I've noticed. There's no such thing as a mentor anymore. The industry was so small 30 years ago. Like I said, you could call somebody, they would talk to you for an hour. They would give you insight. They didn't want anything. They just wanted to help. You're not going to get that today. It's very rare to find somebody, especially director of aviation or director of maintenance, who's going to take the time to help somebody because they're getting bombarded with 50 phone calls. It's just, now everybody's contact information is sold everywhere, right? So we have software companies that's all they do is sell people's contact information. So the people that would normally be there to help, they've been bombarded so many times, they don't want to take the call anymore. And there's just a lot of that kind of stuff that unfortunately has changed. But yeah, I would love to see, the industry of the mid 90s was amazing. I mean, it was just such an embryonic industry. It really was. It was fascinating. It's not to say that doesn't exist anymore. I think there's still a little bit of it, but it's just a completely different ballgame today.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to work in business aviation now?
Believe it or not, I think, the best advice I can give you is to just absorb everything. If you really want to, gosh, it's kind of this is a tough one, because I think, if you want to be in the industry long term, you have to have a certain set of skills. And I think, for example, if you're going to be selling smaller aircraft, I would advise you to learn how to fly them. I would advise you to learn how to work on them. I would advise you to get, a job in management and learn how to manage them. I think, if you're envisioning running your own brokerage house, you have to wear a lot of hats. It's not just finding a listing and selling the airplane. I think being on the smaller end and moving up is a lot better than starting at the high end and moving down. Meaning, I think everybody wants to sell $50 million globals. Who doesn't? But let's just be honest. How many do they actually sell in a year? So if you're a new kid, just graduated, has no experience, I mean, this is the definition of delusional, right? You have no chance of selling a global. Even if you get lucky, it's not going to happen. So you have to bite, you got to cut your teeth. I tell appraisers, go do free appraisal work for a flight school. Just call them and say, hey, I'm learning. can I appraise your aircraft for free? What are they going to say? No. I've never been turned down for a free appraisal, ever. If you want to broker airplanes, I mean, I think you have to know something about an airplane.
Do you think there's a shortage of young appraisers?
I think there is, because it's a really tough, and you'll appreciate this. Appraising an aircraft, while certainly not at the same level of doing open heart surgery, it's very similar in the amount of training required, because you just don't start by doing open heart surgery. It takes 10, 15 years of medical school just to get into the operating room, right? You don't start appraising aircraft from the day you start being an appraiser. You've got to learn the market. You got to learn the aircraft. You've got to learn all these nuances like avionics, technology. You have to know the derivatives. And I'll tell you what, I mean, that is probably the hardest thing for someone just getting into the industry, is to learn, like we were talking about earlier, how the Challenger 3500 is connected to the 350 and the 350 connected to the 300. And you start doing it,
CJ3
right?
is
Yes.
connected to CJ3.
Yes. And you can't, I like to, this really is an apprenticeship type of a role, right? You should shadow somebody. And I think if you really want to be a broker, you really want to be an appraiser, and you want it bad enough, then I think you got to say, hey, can I shadow you? Can I be your apprentice? You're not going to make any money. So if you really want to be passionate and you really want to learn it, right, you got to put the dues in. And I don't think it takes much more than, you want to sell airplanes. I think 6 months of solid, in the trenches work. And I think you could start selling a model. I think you can know enough to be comfortable selling within a niche. We're all taught from a very young age, right? What do they call it? The jack of all trades or master of none, something like that, right? You can't know it all. And I think the best brokers out there will tell you that they really have a specialty, whether it's the Gulfstream market or a mid-sized cabin class. There's a couple brokerage firms out there whose salespeople are even titled with those classes of aircraft that they specialize in, because it adds credibility. You can't know it all. It's impossible. And I think that's one of the huge benefits that VREF has in the market, is that we're your field notes. The stuff that I've learned about some of these aircraft, I don't expect anybody to learn, much less remember. But we put it there so you can retrieve it when you need it.
When did you decide to buy VREF?
So I really wanted to be a competitor, believe it or not. And it was through the research that I'm sure a lot of other folks have gone through that I found it was just not going to happen. And I started working with Aircraft Blue Book, trying to purchase Aircraft Blue Book. And they were open initially. And then I think as things started to progress, it just was not going to be a natural fit for either one of us. And I think it was during that moment of failing that it dawned on me that they weren't the only company that did what they did, that they had a competitor. And it was just pure luck, cold called the owners of VREF. They happened to have been in a position where they were no longer interested in managing it. They were looking for someone like me to manage it. And we had a great conversation, which led to a meeting like 24 hours later in person, and things progressed very quickly. And we got very comfortable with each other very, very quickly. And I think that, in hindsight, they really put a tremendous amount of trust in me. And that's not something I take for granted. It's probably one of the only times in my life where, you put a game plan together, you do your forecasts, you pitch it, and then it actually happens. Because there's a lot of times that it just doesn't take much for your game plan to completely fall off course. I got really lucky. I mean, I'll be honest with you. It was just, I knew the market, I knew the company, and more importantly, I knew the problems that they had, and I knew what they were struggling with before they knew what they were struggling with. And that's because I've been using it since 1993, 1994. So when you're, there's a lot of people I think that have good intention. problem is that sometimes to solve a problem, you have to have a tremendous amount of experience just to recognize it. And so I think, especially with something like a software program that tracks aircraft, it would be nearly impossible, I think, unless you had 3 decades of experience, to come in and figure out what was going on or what was wrong with the processes, or, what could be fixed from a technology standpoint. And that was really the challenges that VREF had, is that it was a non-technology technology company, meaning there was no administrative tools. There wasn't even a CRM. There was nothing. There was a box of Rolodex or like index cards. And every day they'd flip through them, and whichever one was the top was the next subscription renewal. They had no ability to sell online. They had no ability to do anything online. And so my skill set, my background, and me knowing what was wrong with the program, and me knowing the market and the thresholds in the market and our competitors, and I think it gave me a huge strategic advantage.
So you bought, for people who don't know the industry, you have, it's like the car market. You've got Kelly's, Bluebird, you've got, I'm struggling now with the American car
Carfax. Carfax is another one, yeah.
And you
True Cars.
And it's a bit like that in the business jet market, where there's VREF, there's Bluebird, there's a few other competitors.
Yes, absolutely.
And you're quite a competitive guy.
Oh yeah, I mean, I played sports all through high school and college. I played D1 tennis. I'm competitive. I'm not cutthroat. I don't play unfair. Like, I'll give you an example. I think it's one thing if you want to compete. It's another thing if you want to play dirty, meaning like you'll never see VREF mention a competitor by name or say that they're terrible at what they do.
But you like having a competitor.
Right. But I see others that do that. I see other companies that, would like to think that they're a direct competitor of ours, but they're really not. We really only have one direct competitor, and that's Blue Book. In terms of other data sets and stuff that's available for the market, yes, there's a lot of folks that sell operating cost data. There's lots of people that sell, well, there's not lots. There's 2 companies that sell contact information and track transactional metrics, right? But the problem with that, as you're aware, is that the FAA's changed the rules. So a lot of people don't know. We get all the FAA transactional data. We get it every day, just like JetNet, just like Amstat. That all stopped a few months ago. And there is a proposal on the table right now that's got 90% support to never provide ownership information again. It will be locked and sealed. And so, as you can imagine, right, there's a lot of people. Are you familiar with a company called Radio Shack? Do you remember that name?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So Radio Shack started as a electronic relay gadget company, but they didn't make their money doing that. They made their money reselling people's contact information. That's where they made all of their money. They sold those Radio Shack customer sheets to everybody under the sun. At some point in the US, and especially in Great Britain, I think Great Britain took the lead. These privacy laws are serious. GDPR laws are serious. I don't know how you feel about having your name and your phone number and your email in a public database that anybody can pull up and contact you, but I think a lot of folks don't like it. So now that that's going away, right, and the transaction data is no longer available unless you get like a dailies, right? So the way that the FAA provides you data on transactions, it's very cumbersome. There's nothing very easy about it. So I believe that there's going to be an issue going forward for a lot of folks that depended on certain companies to provide contact information, for example, because I don't think you're going to be able to get it anymore because it's going to be a new law that you're not going to be able to get it. So I think the game is going to change again. And I think it's going to be up to the brokerage houses. See, this is where the big shift is going to come. The big houses are probably going to win this one because for the last 10 years, they've been collecting this data. They know who their customers are. They know who their potential customers are. They have their contact information. right? They know the lawyers, they know the accountants, they know the handlers. And if you can't get that data that the couple big houses do, they're going to be the ones doing the deals. So I do think this is going to have a massive, ramification, I guess, through the industry, just because I think people are going to have to change the way that they obtain contact information.
You see, I was going to look at this completely differently and go, are you worried that someone's going to have AI crawling, bringing in data, competing against you?
So I would have been worried if we would have had this conversation 2 years ago. But today I'm not. And the reason is because the reason why I built the new VREF, that was the primary reason why I did it, was so that I have the security in place at VREF will prevent you from doing that. So you cannot scrape anything. Even with our API in place, you cannot feed it into AI. We use a lot of AI engines. We've built our own AI environment, and we've trained it to prevent people from doing it. And we're very protective over, so that's my competitive nature. I'm very protective over our data, and I'm very protective over our IP because, I mean, I've been paying out of my pocket, to rebuild the software and the data. We own it, and it's historical data. It's not something you can just go and obtain. Same thing with the algorithms and everything else we're doing. But I think the old software, like a lot of people's software, there's exposure there. There's a lot of things we can't stop. The AI is the future. But I will tell you, and I've tried doing it, just so you know, I've tried building an AI model to replace VREF. It can't be done. It just cannot be done. It'd be like you trying to start a VREF today. That was what happened. I tried starting one, and I had the knowledge to do it. I don't have the historical data. I don't have the algorithms. More importantly, how are you going to obtain the information about every single aircraft and what was installed in it at the time of delivery? It's just like you'll chase your tail. I think there was a company, or there was a guy, I don't even remember. It was a few years ago, but they were trying to use VREF to appraise or value every single tail number in existence. And I told them, I said, that's just absurd. By the time you're done with the first month, you might as well start all over again because people have changed stuff in the aircraft. And that's really an important issue because, you could track an airplane and you could present a spec sheet to somebody and you could tell them this is the gospel and this is true. And then they go and find out, well, this equipment hasn't been installed in 5 years. There's been a ton of maintenance. The aircraft's been refurbished. How stale is that?
The aircraft's been refurbished and it's horrible. The colors are terrible.
Well, yeah, maybe the colors are horrible. I mean, I'll tell you what, cosmetics, if they're ugly, you better believe it won't sell. No one's going to buy. I had 15 years ago, I had a lime green aircraft for sale. I mean, it was so desperate. I was like looking up logos with lime green, trying to find somebody I could put the plane to. It was just it was so ugly. So
two things drive you. One, you're competitive, and
yes,
and is the other thing you're trying to protect people from ending up in the situation you were in 2008.
Oh, without question. I mean, yes. I mean, they're obviously, we're here to to run a business and do it as good as we possibly can.
Three things.
And I really try. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, every year we set out to improve. We fix things constantly. We're always making, bug fixes. And I mean, we're very, very active in this stuff. And I take it very seriously. If you sat in my office, the guy that calls me with the long easy that's worth $25,000 gets treated exactly the same as the guy with the BBJ. Exactly the same. And I don't take that, lightly. That's a very serious responsibility. I mean, people are trusting us to value their aircraft. If I give them poor information and they make a bad financial decision, they're going to tell everybody they know. The flip side is nobody tells anybody when they have a good experience. But if they have a bad one, you're going to find out. And so I can't replace aircraft owners. There's what, 300,000 of them? I mean, there's just not a lot.
Final question. Do you still listen to punk music?
Yeah, I'm a big I play guitar. I'm a big musician. If you saw my office, it's loaded from ceiling. I bet you I have 5,000 records in my office. I am a huge fan of music. It's like the biggest music and movies were a big part of my schooling. I went to a performing arts school, kind of like Fame, but for in Chicago. And a lot of the people I went to school with are very famous actors and actresses. And I miss that. And so it's still a very big part of my life. I play guitar every day for probably an hour and a half. I have a studio in my basement. When I have, I guess in between hockey, little league, taekwondo classes, and because my kids they're at the age now where it's like it's every day I got something going on. But no, I mean, I absolutely. And I think the punk rock culture, kind of the against the grain and kind of sticking it in the, giving the finger, I guess, to authority when I was younger, probably didn't get me very far. But today having, because I'm very open, right? I understand, what's going on in the world and people are entitled to their opinions, and that doesn't bother me. But at the same time, I think I have a different look or perspective on things because I've seen this industry at its best and its worst. And so a little punk rock, you got to give people a forearm shiver every once in a while, right? You got to wake them up. And I think, part of what I wanted to do with VREF was give them new data, a new way of looking at things. Like I want people to ask questions. First of all, it's the only way we can improve our product. And it's the only way that I know for sure that people are like actually doing their homework. And we have so many analysts and they're so young. And, so the one thing I always say is call me, don't be gun shy about asking for help. This stuff is so complicated.
But now you're firmly established as an industry veteran. You could grow your hair longer again.
Well, at some point I'm going to have to slow down. I mean, I haven't taken a day off.
Jason, you could grow your hair now.
I might. Look, I haven't taken a day off since August of 2017. And I know that because it was my birthday week. And so I took 3 days off and I have not taken a day off since. I promised my family next spring we're going to go to, do something for spring break. But no, I mean, I think the message is I'm super dedicated to what I do. I don't take for granted that I got this opportunity. I don't take for granted that, how blessed I am that, not only do I have a wonderful business and a wonderful group of clients, but I think we make a difference. I think we really impact the market, and that makes me feel great. So I don't take it for granted, and that's why I come in every morning at 8 o'clock and that's why I'm here till 5. And that's why you'll find me on Saturdays and Sundays answering the phone because I care. If I didn't care, I think it would be really obvious. And I will also tell you, I have a really hard time raising our fees and generating, and asking people for more money unless I can give them a better product. And so that is the one thing you can take to the bank. I will never stop improving VREF because it benefits me to do so because I use it every day. I want it to be the best appraisal tool that it can possibly be. And I think with that, I will leave you with the fact that our beta goes live next week. Our new values come out on the 2nd of June, and the new software will be available to the general public by then. And this is just the beginning. We have a brand new API we're going to be bringing out in July or August. And then what I'm really excited about is the market data. I think you'll really get a kick out of the fact that for the first time ever, you'll be able to see piston aircraft, turbine aircraft, helicopters, see what's on the market, regardless of where it's listed, and know how much it's worth without doing anything. And I think that's going to be a game changer personally. I mean, I really am excited about a lot of the new features we have, but yeah, I spend a lot of time perusing listings. And so what I'm really trying to do is make my life easier, all the professional appraisers, all the analysts, because the one thing I'll tell you is we rarely get a thank you, but a job when that deal closes, and that's something that you should be proud about. You had an impact. And I don't take anything that we do here lightly. And I'm super grateful for the opportunity.
Thanks so much. That's Jason Zilberbrand, owner-operator at VREF.